Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome back to the Yiboneh Beit Midrash. Welcome home to Torah. A warm welcome home to Torah. Now, we always discuss fundamentals here. Fundamentals, things you need to know in Yiddishkeit. And we use the Yakar as the basis for our discussion. And I encourage you, there's a link down below that you could get the original Hebrew sheets. We do encourage you to follow along because that's the way to really understand it in the original Hebrew. That's the first thing I'd like to mention. The second thing I'd like to mention is tonight's shiur is dedicated to the yard site of, the Nishama of Michael Klein's mother, Chana, Leah bat Peretz, and Tzipporah Shaindel Peltz. Michael's a dedicated follower, and in fact, I just want to mention that he has donated and dedicated the eternal light, the Ner Tamid that we have in the Beit Midrash. And so this is in the Gimel Nisan, the 3rd of Nisan is his mother's yard site. So we are dedicating tonight's learning in the Aliyat Nishama. She should continue to have an Aliyat Nishama. Some of the topics tonight we're going to be discussing is the difference between what we call malacha and avoda. Those words do appear in different contexts, and we're going to have to find out what is the fine difference. Also, the name of Hashem, one of the names of Hashem, it's not one of the names that you can't erase, but Hamakom. Hamakom, nevertheless, is one of the names of God. We're going to discuss that. Now, before we begin, I also want to mention that we have a campaign to give out what we call Meot Chitim, or Kimcha de Piska, same idea, food for the needy for Pesach. Pesach is just around the corner. Rosh Chodesh is just about any day now. So we're getting ready, and you can donate. There's a link down below in the description box and on our website. Okay, here we go. What we're going to discuss is the verse, at least the first idea is in chapter 39 of Exodus 43, verse 43 in Pikudei. And it starts out by saying that Moses saw the entire work. Now in Hebrew, it's malacha, kol hamalacha. What did he see? V'yar Moshe et kol malacha. He saw all the work that what? And behold, hine asu oisa ka'asher tziva Hashem kein asu. They had done it as the Lord had commanded, so they had done. Sounds even a little repetitive in the verse, but we're going to see other verses that are also quite repetitive. And in fact, when we make Kiddush Friday night, there's some of the same language is used. And it says, so Moses blessed them. We're going to deal with that in the second part of the class. V'yavarech osam Moshe. And Moses blessed them. What was the blessing? Rashi tells us the blessing was, may it be your will, Yehiratzon, that the Shechina should rest. Okay, in fact, the Yakar is going to bring it down, but we're not there yet. But Rashi says, what did he say to them? May it be his will that the Shechina should rest, this is source number 1, in the work of your hands, and may the pleasantness of the Lord our God be upon us. Okay? And by the way, this is that chapter 90 of Psalms, Tehillim, it begins with saying, this is a prayer of Moshe. Okay, so it's interesting that the psalm begins, it's a tefillah of Moshe, it's a prayer of Moshe, and Rashi's plugging it in based on the oral Torah, that this is what he prayed, Psalms 90. What the Yakar is going to have a problem with at first, right? He's going to resolve it. His problem is, where do you have any hint in Psalm 90 that he's using this idea that the Shechina should rest in the temple? The building of the temple doesn't seem to be in that psalm at all, at least at first glance. Okay, so let's go into the Yakar. Yakar begins. Now, there's going to be a little bit of running around to different verses. On the source sheet, I made it easier. Look at source number 2. It's verse 32 of chapter 39. Source number 3 is verse 42. Remember, we're in 43. So as a prelude, before 43, of course you have 32 is before and 42 is before. There's something about these 3 verses, right? Verse 43, 42, and 32 that is necessary to have, to be cognizant of. I'm just turning off my sound here. Here we go. So the Yakar says, Yesh lidakdek, carefully examine. One should carefully examine. Lama nemar mitchila. Why in verse 32, in the beginning of this paragraph, so to speak, v'techel kol avodat mishkan ohel moed, the verse says, right, and all the work was completed for the tabernacle of the tent of meeting. So the word avoda is used. Remember, our verse, the word malacha is used. And in verse 32, it says avoda. V'chein nemar b'sof, meaning at the end of that seeming paragraph, verse 42, there's a whole bunch of verses in between. Kain asu b'nei Israel es kol ha'avoda. Again, avoda is used. So again, if you look in source 1, source 2, and for source 3, you have these 3 verses. You can clearly see that in our verse 43, malacha is used. 10 verses before, right? We said in 32 and again in 42, avoda is used. And this should not bother us, but at least awaken us to what is the difference between malacha and avoda. Let's call that the first observation or question that the Yakar has. And he says va'od, right? 3 lines down in the Hebrew, 4th word before the end of the line, nira hakethel bishnei psukim elu. Be aware, notice, it seems that there's a repetition, right? Kethel. We'll see that it's not even twice, it could be 3 or 4 times, but there's a repetition in these verses. Now he says the Ramban explains, and this is interesting, just so we should know what the Ramban says, Nachmanides, Sh'amar ze ala mishkan va'ala kelim. Meaning there's a difference. The word malacha, according to the Ramban, is going on the Mishkan, and that's malacha, and the word avoda seems to be going on the kelim. That's at first glance, according to the Ramban. Ulai das harav shahamishkan nikra malacha, aval hakelim nikra avoda. Right? Perhaps that's what the Rav is saying, meaning that's what the Nachmanides is saying, that when it comes to the Mishkan, the word milacha, again, we can translate in English as work, right? That's how it's normally translated, but it's clearly, in Hebrew, a very different word, malacha and avoda. But when it comes to the kelim, for some reason, that is where the word avoda is used. That's the expression used there. Al shem shebehem hayu oivdim avodas hakorbanos. And perhaps, like we all know, that there's 3 pillars in Judaism, right? Torah, avoda, and gemilas chasadim. What's the avoda? Avoda is talking about the korbanos. That's right. Aaron the Kohen, the Kohanim, but it's the korbanos, and our prayers replace the bullocks, right? So when we talk about avoda, what is avoda? Avoda shebalev. That's the prayer. That's the heartfelt yearnings, right? So avoda. Let me just translate. Therefore, according to the Yakar, the way he understands the Ramban, why kelim, the word avoda, is used, because it's referring to the actual usage of the kelim, right? Whether it's the mizbeach, the altar, whether it's the utensils used, right, or the incense altar, or the incense itself. Mikom makom lo yitzanu midei hakefel. According to the Yakar, we haven't yet resolved. We haven't resolved this idea of the fact that it's repeated several times. Ki shlosha pa'amim nizkar kan shi'asu ha'avoda v'hamalacha. Right? We have at least 3 times in these 3 verses that we mentioned, the word malach is used, the word avoda is used twice, and so therefore he's claiming that there are 3 times that we mentioned here both concepts. At least that's how the Yakar begins, by laying the groundwork for this discussion. So the Yakar continues, Al kein nira lefaresh zeh al pi a midrash, hadoiresh kol maaseh mishkan keneged maaseh breshit. The Yakar wants to explain, it seems like you can explain this according to the Medrash. There's a Medrash that explains that the building, the construction of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, and also the temple is parallels, connected, or corresponds to what we'll call creation, Maaseh Bereshis. In fact, we've already discussed this several times through the last few Parshiot, that when Shabbos comes, Shabbos is not, right, Docha, right? Shabbos is more important than building the Mishkan. You have to stop the Malacha, and just like God created the world in 6 days, and He ceased from creating, so too, we follow God, right? And we also cease from creating, and we stop. But if that's not the only correspondence, right? The whole idea, and this is maybe difficult for many people if they're hearing it for the first time, God did create the universe. That's not the difficult part. But that when we created the Mishkan, that's a microcosm of the universe. What does that mean? We are partners with God in creation. That would be the simple pshat. And we're going to get into a little bit deeper. When I mentioned earlier, the word hamakom is a name for God. We're going to get into it and it will become a little bit clearer what parallels or correspondence there is between our building this Mishkan and God's creating the world. Ayin kol hamidrash b'Rabbeinu Bechaya Parsha Zu. I have to admit, I searched high and low for this Rabbeinu Bechaya, and it's my shortcoming. I couldn't find it, but just assume that what he's saying is correct. Maybe the quote is the wrong place. Milvad harbe dimyonim shehoisiv harav mishalo. He's making this claim that Rabbeinu Bechaya made many dimyonim, analogies, that he came up with on his own. Yashev gam came lashon avoda umalacha. And according to the way the Yakar understands Rabbeinu Bechaya, this resolves many of the explanations for the expressions, the different expressions, the word avoda and milacha. Ki al melechet hamishkan shayach lomar lashon avoda. Now, the truth is, it's very interesting what he's saying, that even by building the Mishkan, that itself is an avoda because God commanded us to do it. Anything we're doing for God is called avoda. Okay, so avoda would fit in. As he says, Shaykh Lomar Lashon Avoda, Ki ba ovdu el Hashem Yisbarach, because it is, right? It's one of the 613 commandments. When we do the commandments, we were serving Hashem, and building the Mishkan was certainly service to God. And now he makes a certain clarification. Ein avoda ki imin ha'eved el ha'adon. The whole concept of avoda, you can translate it as servitude, right? The concept of servitude is the eved serving the master, right? And God is our master. He created us. We are serving Him. Avaloshan malacha. So what's the difference? The word malacha, by the way, it can also mean control, but we're going to use it as malacha. Malacha is noithel b'malechet shamayim v'aretz. He's making this claim that the word malacha is used, is applicable when God created the heavens and earth, which we saw clearly in Bereshit, in the creation of the world, which we'll see again the verses clearly. Kima shahapoel oisei liatzmo nikra malacha. When you're doing something for yourself, the word malacha is more applicable. When you're doing something for somebody else, so then avoda would be more applicable because there's at least a master or someone paying you or someone asking you. So if you look at chapter 2, verse 2 in Genesis, that's number 5 on the source sheet, right? We say this in Kiddush. Hashem finished on the 7th day His work. He was doing it for Himself, as opposed to, He certainly doesn't have any master over Him. He is the master of the universe. And the Yakar continues, Kamosha mitzinu b'maseh breshis, right? Just like we see in the creation of the world. Shenemar, b'kol melacha. So let's say it's not said every day, but each day that it is said, it says that it was kitov, right? That it was good. So he saw it for himself. And in chapter 1, verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Now, I just want to stop here because we're saying, our verse says Moses saw all the malacha. Interesting. And over there in Genesis, God saw all the malacha, and it was very good. It's very, it's interesting that very similar language is being used.
So Moshe saw the work being made.
Well, it says he saw it finished. So we'll have to discuss what happened at the end. By God, it's a very interesting introduction, what you're asking, because he will discuss this in a very fascinating way. He says, right away, Ki yesh lecha dvarim. Imagine you have several items in front of you, right? You have things in front of you. You have things. That's the word, things. Shem toivim kishehem kol echad b'fnei atzmo. Each one of these different materials or ingredients on their own could be very good. They could be fine. But what happens if you mixed all those things together? It could be that they're not very good. It's not a good mixture. You ever have these things, right? You can try to make a cake and you just use your imagination, start throwing things that aren't in the recipe. Well, guess what? On their own, they might be very good. But together, who says they're very good? So the same thing here. Ki ein zivugam ola yafa. Once they're all bound together or matched together, who says that it's going to be a nice outcome? Al kein amar b'maaseh bereshis. Therefore, what did God say? After he made each day and different things on each day, on their own they were good. Where am I at? Shekulam hayatoivim kishaya kol echad mehem bi'atzmo. It very well be that they're all good individually on their own. Dahainu tov prati. That individually they're good. But what did God say afterwards? Shagam tov klali hayabehem. You know what? When they're all mixed together, when I made the whole world, it's really good. See that even after he combined, the days melted into the next day, and the whole system of biology and astronomy, all the different sciences, when you study human nature or you study the nature itself, how everything seems to work out. So when they're all together, they were good. That's why it goes back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 31, number 6. God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. He saw after all the different individual things that were good, when they're all together, they're tov ma'od. And now the Yakar says, Kach ba'avodas hamishkan. So too, each individual vessel or part might have been good on their own. Kach ba'avodas hamishkan. Mitchila amar. So in verse 32, which we said was the beginning, V'teicha kol avodas hamishkan oel moed, v'yasu b'nei Yisrael kechol asher tziva Hashem es Moshe kein asu. So that the word avoda was used, and everything was individually fine. Shemashma shekol echad b'fnei atzmo nasa kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe. It's very fine. This infers that each thing individually was made according to the way God told Moses in the construction of the tabernacle. Aval adayin lo porasha achesh nasa kol asidru kol avoda al makomo hamiyuchad lo. But it was not yet explained that after everything was made and then the order was made for all the different types of service in a specific place at a specific time that was unique for it, it was specified for it, Dahainu tov klali, that it was going to be generally good. Al kein chaz of the Amar. That's why in verse 42, like a summary of those 10 verses, Kekol asher tziva Hashem es Moshe. Just as God had commanded Moses, kein asu, that's what the children of Israel did at kol ha'avodah. Ki hay behem tov klali. That would be a general statement that everything works together. Very well. Shenasu al haseder hanachon, that everything was done according to a proper order. Dahainu chibur kol ha'avoda biyachad, the way everything functions is perfect. V'yachar chachozer levoyer, and afterwards it's like a repetition to explain. Shekol ma she'asa nasel tzivoi malechet. It's like a summary. Verse 43 would be a summary of verses 1. I'm sorry, when I say 1, verse 32 through 42. Then 43 comes and says the word malacha. Right? Olamot shamayim va'aretz. That everything was done according to the command of the work of the universe. When it says Olamot shamayim va'aretz, we're talking about the creation of the universe. That the way that the tabernacle functions is exactly similar on some level, whatever level that is, some Kabbalistic understanding or deep understanding, that this is what is keeping the world going. It's a partnership with God, and it is amazing, just as the creation of the world. And the last line on this page, this is our verse. In verse 43, Moses saw all the malacha, v'yar Moshe et kol malacha. What does that mean? Hainu, maleches maaseh bereshis. It was as if he saw the entire world being recreated. Now this is very deep, because what we're talking about here on a certain level, I'm kind of spoon-feeding you. Ready for this? We're going to find out, right, just like the world was created in 6 days, and then God rested on the seventh. There's 2,000, each year is like 1,000 years in God's eyes. 2,000 years of what we call tohu vavohu. 2,000 years of what we call Torah. And then the last 2,000 years, which we're in now, is the years of Mashiach, that when we were at Mount Sinai, we were just entering it was, well, actually since Abraham discovered God. We had just entered the years of Torah, and 448 years after Avram discovered God at the age of 52. That when we stood at Mount Sinai, so we were already in the 2,000 years, the beginning of 2,000 years of Torah. By the sin of the golden calf, there was a reversal, and we went back to Tohu Vavohu. But after we repented and Hashem and Moses prayed for our forgiveness, and we were forgiven, the day following Yom Kippur, we were given the instructions to build the Mishkan, and the Mishkan itself atones for the sin of the golden calf, according to Rashi at least. Guess what happened? We were re-entering the years of Torah. So in other words, we were just in the beginning of Torah, we messed up with the sin of the golden calf, we went back to Tohu Vavohu, and then through the whole atonement procedure with the Mishkan, it was like the world was recreated anew in those 2,000 years of Torah. We began the 2,000 years of Torah anew. That is my summary, but let's see what the Yakar has to say. So after the Yakar just got done saying that Moses saw all the malacha of the Maseh Breshis, of the creation of the world. Hine asu ota, that they had made it, meaning to say, sha'asa dugmat osa malacha. What the Jewish people created through the Mishkan was an example, or let's say a symbol. It was synonymous with the creation of the world, which Hashem did. We call that malacha, ki'ilu hayasihim mamish osa malacha. Meaning when we created and built this Mishkan, it was as if we did exactly what God did when He created the world. And then it says that Moses blessed them. Remember, in Kiddush, we're saying God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Here, V'yovarech osam Moshe, Moses blessed us. Okay, now we're going to find out what exactly was that blessing. V'yavarech osam Moshe. We already saw Rashi that Moses prayed that the Shekhinah should rest on the Jewish people. Okay, ma baracha bercham. What blessing did Moses bless them with? And we saw in English in Rashi, but here's the Hebrew. Yiratzon shetishra Shekhinah b'masa yedechem. That Moses was praying that the God's divine presence should rest on the work, the productivity of their hands. And interestingly, right, this is the last verse of Psalms 90. We're going to focus a lot for the next few minutes on Psalms 90. And we say this Motzi Shabbos and other times, V'hi Noam Adonai Eloheinu Aleinu. We're asking, it's interesting, right? May the pleasantness of God, the pleasantness of God, our God, rest upon us, Aleinu. So Rabbeinu Bechai explains, Lefish Nemar B'tchilas Mizmor. If you go back to verse 1 of chapter 90, it says, Tefillah LaMoshe, Ish Elohim. It's actually a prayer of Moses, but he's called Ish Elohim. He's called a man of God. Ein ze maspik elakavana. The Yakar is not satisfied. He thinks it's not sufficient, elakavana, to get this point across. Im bekol hamizmor ein remez lebinyan hamishkan. If you carefully examine chapter 90, which we will, it doesn't seem at first glance to say anything about the building of the Mishkan. So the Yakar says in the fourth line down in this paragraph, V'yomer ani, I'm going to say, he has his own thoughts, and he's going to tell us what is on his mind. He says, Sheyesh remez nachon el binyan hamishkan b'tchila hamizmor ubesof. There actually is an remez nachon, a clear allusion. It's proper hints towards the building of the Beis HaMikdash in the beginning of chapter 90 as well as at the end. Think about what it says in the beginning, the first verse. Ki betchila amar, chapter 90, verse 1. Adonai me'on ata hayita lanu bador vador. Now you'll see this on source number 8. A prayer of Moses, the man of God, Lord. Now what does it say? It says, you have been our dwelling place throughout all generations. Ma'on, the word ma'on, it's like a clubhouse. It's a place you feel comfortable. It's a home. You are the dwelling. You are the dwelling place for us, for all generations. Okay, it is interesting. I want to show that Rashi with you, to share that Rashi with you. It mentions that Moses recited all 11 Psalms. Now, we say that Dovid is the one who compiled the Psalms. He didn't write them all, right? Even Adam Rishon and Moses and many others had written some of them. This is these 11. So from 90 to 100, that's the 11 Psalms that he wrote. Corresponding to them, Moses blessed 11 tribes with 11 blessings. Going back to Deuteronomy chapter 33, where before he passed on, who did he not? He did not bless Shimon. Okay? And the word ma'on is an abode or in a refuge in which you would enter. And that is what you have been for us, Hashem. And then we're going to get into the word hamakom. Hashem has been our abode and our refuge. Going back into the Yakar, we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. V'hu al derech she'amar Shlomo b'tfilato k'shechanach hamikdash. In 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 27, when King Solomon dedicated and inaugurated the temple, let's read it in English first. But will God indeed dwell on the earth? How can I build this house expecting God to live there? I mean, God is bigger than us, bigger than this house. It's not going to contain him. Behold, the heaven and the heavens of heavens cannot contain God, much less this temple that I've erected. And yet, we all know that God says, build me a temple in which I could what? Dwell in them, not in it. Okay, we're going to get to that. So, King Solomon is building a house for God, but he understands clearly that God cannot fit. It's not a fit. Okay? And now we're going to get into this statement. I'll just read the Hebrew now. Kihine shemayim ushmeh shemayim lo yechalchalucha v'af ki habayit hazeh. There's no way that it can contain. The word yechalchalucha is like it cannot contain. And this is what it says in our verse 1 of chapter 90. Adonai me'on ata hayita. You are our refuge. You are where we dwell. Right? You're our dwelling. And now these are the famous words. It's not easy to understand. Maybe it is. Ata ma'ono shel olam. That you are the place of the world. And we're going to see a good explanation for this. Ve'ein ha'olam makom u'ma'on lecha. So the world dwells within you, but you cannot possibly dwell in the world. The place, okay, let's go into, on the last page of the English, look at the last page of the English. I have here the Art Scroll Midrash Rabbah. We don't have to read the top, I don't believe. What I want to read is the very bottom, the insights. See, there's a small paragraph at the bottom. By the way, so this Midrash Rabbah is going on the very idea that when Yaakov approached that place, he was v'yifka b'makom, he prayed in that place, the very fact that it says b'makom, God is called the place. So what does it mean, the place of the world? The word makom, we know it means place, can be phonetically related to mikayem. Mikayem means sustains, upholds, establishes. The existence of an object, because you have to really think deeply about this, is often made possible by the place it occupies. For example, a glass bowl rests upon a shelf. Were the shelf to be removed, the bowl would fall to the ground and shatter. Thus, it is the shelf that sustains the bowl and enables its continued existence. So too with respect to God and his relationship to the world. The world exists because God continually wills it into being. It is he who sustains all creatures, each blade of grass, a bird, ocean and skies, the star above, humanity. Everything exists because he wills it into existence. All exist on his sufferance. All are sustained by his will. If God were to withdraw his support from his creation, it would, upon the moment, crumble away into nothingness. All would cease to exist, since it is he who sustains all creation. Therefore, he's referred to as Ha-Makom, the place of the world. Rav Shimon Schwab notes that the sages generally refer to God as Ha-Makom. Now wait till you hear this. We've been saying Ha-Makom Yinachem Eschem when we hear bad news or people have passed on, and there's other times we use Ha-Makom. And wait till you hear what Rabbi Shimon Schwab notes. That yes, the sages generally refer to God as a makom in context where loss, tragedy, or suffering is involved. Thus we find with regard to those who have sustained financial loss, what's the words we say? Ha-makom yemale chisroncha. That the place, Hashem, what we call the place, should replace your loss. That's in the Gemara Bracha 16b. And of course, we are all familiar with regard to comforting mourners. Hamakim yinachem eschem. May the place. It's a strange word to use, but that's console you. And with regard to encouraging the sick, what do you say to a sick person? Hamakim yirachem alecha. May the place have mercy on you. That's in Gemara Shabbos 12b. The reason is that in times of distress, there is a tendency to wonder, how could this have happened, right? Your faith is being tested. And on some level, perhaps, even to question whether God is even involved. At such times, we remind the sufferer that he is the place of the world. Nothing at all exists or happens without him. We are and we will be sustained by him alone. It is he who will comfort and restore. Okay, so back into the Kli. I hope that was interesting. I certainly found it interesting. The Kli Yakar begins with those words, Atam ma'ona sha'olam ve'in ha'olam makom ma'on l'cha. If that's the case, that you are the dwelling place of the world, but you don't dwell in this world, Eich ya'aleh ahadat, how could you ever think she'yachinu l'cha bayis l'hitkomem bo, that we could possibly prepare a home for God, to prepare a house where he could establish his presence. So the Kli Yakar says, V'nosen moifet al zeh. If you look at verse 2 of our Psalms, right? We're in verse 2 of Psalms chapter 90. Where do we see that on the source sheet? It is number 10. Before the mountains were born, you brought forth the earth and the inhabited world, and from everlasting to everlasting. In other words, God came before the world. If God came before the world, where did he exist before the world was created? It should be very obvious and pashut, like we just said. So in Hebrew, B'terem harim yuladu v'cholel eretz v'tevel u'me'olam ad olam ata'el. Now, if God actually needs to exist in a particular place, which we know he doesn't, but if he did, so then prior to the creation of the world, where was his place? Where did he exist? With absolute certainty, the world is not his place. In fact, the opposite is true. That it's within God, which is infinite. So the finite can fit within the infinite, but the infinite can certainly not fit within the finite. So how could it ever come upon our minds? How can we ever imagine that Hashem commanded us to build for him a house, right? As if he would exist in a certain place. Therefore, verse 3 in Psalms chapter 90 is coming as if to answer. What does it say in verse 3? That's number 11 on the source sheet. It says, you bring man to the crushing point. We'll have to see in Hebrew the word daka. The toimer, what do you say? Return, O sons of man. Shuvu b'nei adam. Okay. What does the Yakar have to say about this verse? He brings it up. He says, Hutzrach HaKadosh Baruch Hu levater al kavodo, that Hashem found it necessary to overlook his own honor, v'lasos lo midur b'tachtonim, in order to make some type of dwelling place in this world, kidei limcho lehem avon ha'egel, in order not just to forgive them, but to show them they were forgiven. It's not just to forgive, because he could forgive them anyway, but he really wanted us to know his Shekhinah is going to rest with us. The whole world, are you listening, world? The world has to know and see, at least it was then, and you can see it through the mass amount of Jews living together, that the Shekhinah really is dwelling on a certain level with us, even though we don't have the temple, because he's dwelling within us. That Hashem has forgiven us for the sin of the golden calf. In fact, as I think we mentioned in the beginning, according to Rashi, the whole concept of Mishkan is to act as a kapara for the sin of the golden calf. Okay? So he ends by giving us this, he ends this paragraph by quoting Midrash Tanchuma, Hoya HaMishkan Kulo Kapara Al Maseh Ego. That it shows that it's a fact that there was complete atonement for the sin of the golden calf. Now, just to compare two different sins, the sin of the golden calf, for the most part, we'll say was atoned for and was continued to be atoned for, as opposed to the sin of the meraglim, of the spies, which unfortunately till this day we are still suffering. We have to make a tikkun. I'm talking to my people out here. Come home, right? I think that's the best way to make a tikkun. We spoke Lashon Hara. We weren't interested in entering the land. All you have to do is get on a plane, right? How hard it was for 2,000 years, I get it. People got killed, people got, pirated, whatever it was, even the Kuzari, Rabbi Yehuda Levi. He finally made it here. And as he's looking down from, I guess, the top of the Kotel steps, I don't know if there were steps, maybe it was a cliff, an Arab stabbed him in the back. I understand it was difficult. It was very hard. But it doesn't seem that hard. We had an alarm today. Baruch Hashem. Thank God for what they call, I'm not even sure what it's called anymore, the Iron Dome and the slingshot and who knows what else that Hashem has up his sleeve through the fantastic scientists. Baruch Hashem. Okay, the next paragraph, it's the second from the bottom. Ulai mitam zeh nasa mishkan al tamuna ta'olam biklalo. It's perhaps for this very reason that the pattern of the Mishkan, that the Mishkan was made according to a certain pattern of the way the world works. In general, as we mentioned earlier, before the giving of the Torah, that the state of the world was in what we call chaos and void, right? Tohu. They had Torah, but now once Avraham and leading up to Matan Torah, that the world emerged out of that state of chaos and void. Unfortunately, right, through the sin of the golden calf, and as a result, the luchos, the Torah, so to speak, was broken. According to the Yakar, we reverted back to that state of being of the first 2,000 years. However, once we were given forgiveness and we were told to build this Mishkan and use it for worshiping Hashem, we were forgiven for the sin of the Egel, that we emerged out a second time from that earlier state of the first 2,000 years of chaos and void. It was similar as if the world was created a second time, at that moment. Therefore, it made sense that we were commanded, right? We were commanded after this, the atonement for the sin, to build Hashem a house, very similar to the three, and this is mystical. I couldn't find exactly where he's talking about, but I know the Yakar does speak about the idea. There's the Tachtonim, that's the human world. Then you have the Malachim, which is in the middle world. And then you have the Godhead in the top world. So that could be what he's talking about. And that's very similar to what we have in the temple, the Tochnit, the Tavnit. You have the Holy of Holies on the inside, the innermost room. Then you have the Kodesh, which is in the middle room. And then you either have the Chatzer, or right, you have a room you go in before. So there's these three rooms. So what is happening now that we were just forgiven for the sin of the golden calf, and the world was like so as if it was recreated, that it went back to, let's say, the quality that it was before the sin. We were back into the state of Torah. Amazing. I mean, when you really think about it, the man called Salafchad, he was the same man that picked up the sticks on Shabbat in the desert. And why did he do that? So that people would know how serious the transgression of Shabbos is, and that one could do tshuva, perhaps even on a Marishon. Was it the right thing to do, to eat from the tree of knowledge and good and evil? For some reason, we have a better world because of it. Now we have the ability to earn reward. So here you have the ability to do tshuva. So Hashem gave, He gave an opening or an argument so that Bali Tshuva should know that their sins can be overturned. And what does he say here? It's from Lo aso Yisrael es ha'ego ela kedei litain piskoin peh lebalei tshuva. Chazal tell us that seemingly the only reason the Jews involved themselves with the golden calf was in order to teach the world, similar like King David, right? To let people know you can do tshuva. V'zeh sh'amar k'metaretz. That's very similar to explaining as an answer. Why in the world would God build a house here? He can't fit in it. Because he wanted people to turn back. What did it say in verse 3 of chapter 90? We saw it already. It is number 11. You bring man to the crushing point. You say, do tshuva. Return, O sons of man. Wait till you hear this. Dor she reshumos amru. So there's a mystical explanation. The word daka, dalet, chaf, aleph. The Reishi Tevos, it's an acronym for dalet is dam, murder. kfira. The kaf is for kfir, which is heresy, and the aleph is for isha. So you're talking about murder, heresy, and illicit sexual relations. And I hope you understand that at the sin of the golden calf, we did all three, right? And we see the word, v'yakumu litzachek, right, in chapter 32, verse 6 of Exodus, that they got up to revel. This word litzachek infers that it's used for all three of the three cardinal sins. So these are three cardinal sins: murder, heresy, and illicit sexual relations. Ki masa egel avru al shaloshtan. So they sinned in all three of these cardinal sins. Kfira, which is obvious, kpshuto, during the sin of the golden calf. Dam, isha, kamosh perish Rashi. Rashi actually says on the verse, 32 verse 6, v'yikumu litzachek sha'avru gam al gilei arayos. Right? Now, maybe you saw the movie, maybe you didn't, right? With, what's his name? Charlton Heston. I know there was a scene, they had belly dancers, right? But they didn't, it was back in the day, they wouldn't show anything that was too X-rated, right? So the belly dancers represented the sexual relations. Chor was murdered. I don't think that made the movie, but Chor, which was Miriam's son, was murdered. And, so the word daka. Now, what's the point here? That if you violate any one of the three cardinal sins, you could be forgiven, which makes a kal v'chomer that if you did anything less than that, for sure you would be forgiven. That's why the three cardinal sins are alluded to in the word daka. So, as Rashi explains on the verse, Yakum l'tzachek, that they transgressed also, sha'aru gam gilui arayos, sexual sins, shfichas damim, and murder. That God wanted to let you know, right? He's giving you an argument for those people who might have transgressed any one of the three cardinal sins. Zeshamar, as it says in the end of verse 3, V'tomer, you should say, Shuvu b'nei Israel. The Jewish people the human beings should do tshuva. Son of man, mikano lahaba, and from here on forward, there is nothing preventing you. There's nothing holding you back. Hashem accepts your tshuva for the big ones. Look what he says as we turn the page. Right? If it's effective, if tshuva is effective for these three big cardinal sins, that any sins that are lighter than that, certainly tshuva is effective. The achar min, right? Then we have in verse 4, right? Look at verse 4. Where is that on the source sheet? By the way, we just read in number 16, that was verse 3. 14 is... I want to read the Rashi on Exodus 32:6. Right? On the next day they arose early, offered up burnt offerings, and brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and drink, and it says they got up to make merry. V'yakumu litzachek. Rashi mentions the word litzachek is a connotation also for sexual immorality, as you can find in Genesis 39:17, as well as in bloodshed, right? And also, we also know that Chor was slain from the Midrash. So you have all three sins. Okay, so afterwards, if you look in verse 4, for 1,000 years are in your eyes like yesterday, which passed, and a watch in the night. Right? Ki elef shanim be'einecha kiyom etmo. So every year is 1,000 years. Hakol medaber be'inyan teshuva asher hu oimed po. So this whole idea, meaning sounds like a lot of this Psalm 90 is speaking about tshuva, which is referring to here. Like, for example, in verse 16. So we had verse 1 through 16. We started with verse 17, which is Vihinoam. So verse 16 is Yira'eh el avadecha pa'alecha. Right? May your deeds be visible to your servants. May your deeds, and this is Moses' prayer, may your deeds, O God, be visible to your servants. Remember how we started off, it sounds like in chapter 90 there's no allusion whatsoever about the building of the Mishkan? Well, we already saw quite a few ideas. Well, he says this one also is. This is actually referring to the building of the Mishkan. Habinoi betavnit binyan kol ha'olam, because it was built in a similar fashion to like the world, the pattern of the world. Shai pu'ulat Hashem yisbarach, right? It was according to the handiwork of God. And it says in verse 4, Yero'eh elavadecha pa'alecha, may your deeds be visible to your servants. Sheyiru shamecha maseh espotecha, that they should see your name, right, as a action or a production of your fingers, right? V'yasu kitav nitam, that they should make it exactly according to your pattern. And in verse 16, it goes on, it says, V'hadarcha, right? Let's look again in verse 16. I hope I have it here. Number 19. May your work appears to your servants, your beauty to their sons. V'hadarcha al banehem. It does say banehem, to their sons. Okay, to their young. We have this idea of bonayich, right? Let's just read it here. The word banecha and bonayich, there's a little bit of a play on the vowels to explain that your sons, your children are your builders. But the word builders, it's the exact same root. Guess what? Who are the builders? We're talking about the builders of the Mishkan. Okay? So it should be visible to your servants. May your deeds be visible to your servants, like we said. And then that your beauty, Hainu hadarat shkinatcha. What is your beauty? It's your presence. It's your shchina. Al banehem should be visible to your children. Yicholiyot al derech amru chazal, like we said in Brachos 64a. What does it mean? V'rav shalom banayich, right? And your children their peace should increase. Don't read it as banayich, but rather read it as bonayich. Don't read it as your sons, but read it as your builders. V'chein emar parshas v'yishlach. The Yakar explains over there, ubanehem shaloshim, by these young camels over there, 30 nursing camels with their young. It says ubanehem shaloshim, but it basically has to do with what's the word? Building. Look at Rashi over there. Rashi says regarding those 30 nursing camels. B'nehem, they're young with them. According to the Midrash Agada, the word uvnehem means bonayehem, which means the builders. They were, used for breeding. When you have a bunch of males who need to go and be with the female animals, you're building your flock, you're building your empire to impregnate them. And a male would correspond to the female. Okay, so let's move on. This idea of bonehem or bonayich is your builders. And that's what it means over there. Rashi actually says that, and we read the Rashi. Ha'amurka medaber b'bonei binyan mishkan. But what the Yakar is saying, that it's really referring to the people who built this edifice, the people who were building, right? So we see in chapter 90, verse 16, clearly talking about the people who built it. Shaleim emar, Amar, regarding those, the builders, Moses' prayer was that the people who build it, they should see the beauty. What's the beauty? The ziv of the Shechina, the light of the brilliance of God's presence within the building itself. And that's from here. That's how the author of the Midrash understood that was Moses' prayer, that Moses prayed that the Shechina should rest on the work of their hands. Okay, let's just finish. V'amar v'hi noam Adonai Eloheinu aleinu. We said in verse 17, this cryptic verse, that God's pleasantness should be upon us. Since it said, we had this in chapter 25 of Exodus, verse 8, V'osuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Right? You might have thought it says, make me a house, a temple, so I can dwell in it. It does not say that. Make me a temple so I can dwell in you, in them, among them. Betocho le'onemar, it doesn't say in it. Ela betocham, I should dwell in them. Ki ikar hashchina ba'avur Yisrael. The prime purpose of the Shechina dwelling amongst us is on account of us, the Jewish people. Al Kein Amar, that's why it says, Shenoam Hashem, God's pleasantness. Hainu Ziv Hadarach Kinato Yisbrach. We're talking about the brilliant splendor, the radiance of God. That should be Aleinu. That should be upon us, Aleinu. Umasa Yedenu Konana Aleinu Umasa Yedenu Konanehu. I know it's a little bit of a tongue twister, and in Hebrew it's even harder, but basically it's saying the work of our hands, right, should be established for us, and the work of our hands establish it. I just want to read the verse as it is. And may the pleasantness of the Lord our God be upon us, and the work of our hands establish for us, and the work of our hands establish it. So it's a little bit hard, but the Yakar says like this. The idea that Nira Shemilat Konanehu, right, it's going to establish him, it's Musav Kalpe Ashchina. It's actually going towards the presence of God. Ki pasuk ze medaber benistar im hashchina. That's why you don't know it's talking about God or you, because it's nistar means it's third person, but it's referring to the Shechina according to the Yakar. Al Kein Amar, that's why it says Masa Yedenu, the work of our hands. What was the work of our hands? That's the Mishkan. Asu konanot l'Shechina. This was made or established as a dwelling place for the Shechina, vilanu, and for us. We're partners. Lahoshivanu yachad b'medur echad. That we would dwell together with God jointly in one, let's just say in one structure. Ki mishkan makom dira le'elyonim v'taktonim ke'echad. That the Mishkan served as a place where God and us could dwell together. Al Kein Amar, that's why this verse is so cryptic. Kona aleinu, established for us. V'koneu, we read it as, because it's third person, established for him. Al Derek Shenemar, as it says in Exodus chapter 15, verse 17, which is by the Song of the Sea. Machon l'shivtecha pa'alta Hashem, okay, that the place of your dwelling which you have made, zema shenira li lahosif al kol divrei meforshim bezeh mizmor lefarshu al binyan mishkan. This is the Yakar's understanding. He added some understanding over and above what other commentators have said to explain how chapter 90, this mizmor, relates or explains the building of the Beis HaMikdash. So I hope Friday night when we read these verses, or Shabbos, whenever we read these verses, that we have a better understanding and we have a deeper relationship with God and of course with each other, and we continue to learn Torah. And B'ezrat Hashem, not only should we say Chodesh Tov, this is the Chodesh of Gula, the month of redemption. B'ezrat Hashem, we should see the real building of the Beis HaMikdash. I know we're all going to work on our own inner temple, our own inner Mikdash, but B'ezrat Hashem, we'll see it on the ground just as well. And have a great Shabbos and a great life. And Hag Sameach.
Good.
Nishama shir shir